I am a high school algebra teacher in the largest public school district in the state of Tennessee, which also comes with it being the most disenfranchised and impoverished districts in Tennessee, primarily because majority of our student population are Black people. And today I am here to talk about the epidemic, quote unquote, of the YN. And I'm here to talk about it from a teacher's perspective because I can see it, I'm seeing it from the ground and how it's developing, and I can tell kind of where it's going, if that makes sense. And to preface the conversation, I do not subscribe to the term YN. I understand that it is a caricature of describing young Black men who might be in trouble or might have like certain decisions that they make due to the circumstances and the environments that they're growing up in. But I do not subscribe to calling young Black men YN. So I wanted to start off by saying that too. Most of the time when you hear people talk about just where Black people are as a community in today's time, especially the young people, you hear a lot of it being blamed on the parenting, on the system, on the education system, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those things are true. I think this conversation is a lot more nuanced, and it takes place at the intersectionality of all of it. So in order to not make this video extremely long, I'm going to actually break this down into 3 parts. In this part, I will talk explicitly about parenting. And the parenting goes back a lot further than I think some people are cognizantly thinking about. The parenting goes back to, especially in the Black community, we're going back to Reaganomics, right? When you have multiple generations of people not being present due to drug abuse, due to mass incarceration, due to the perpetuation of like the welfare state, all of these things, right? They create this kind of like dependency in this environment, and that is kind of what we're seeing the effects of trickled all the way down. I know these things happened 30 plus 40 years ago, but I think now we're starting to see the effects. So with the parenting explicitly, right? Parenting matters so much here because the parents weren't present. Right? If we're talking about the crack epidemic and the whole dropping guns and drugs and all of these things into our neighborhoods and completely destroying the Black community, most of the damage of that is because of lack of presence. So you have the original doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, businessmen, these people who were pillars in the community now addicted to drugs and not able to be present for said community. So when they should have been in the households or in the neighborhoods helping to raise children, helping to show up for children, helping like making sure they're going to school, making sure there's somebody that the kids are always taken care of, you have a lot of children who ended up raising themselves or were being raised by their grandparents, which happened to be the boomers at the time. And when you talk about being raised by boomers or grandparents, now we're talking about permissive parenting, because realistically, a grandparent cannot show up in the same ways that your parent can because of different restrictions, whether it be mobility, age, job, all of that, right? There's a reason. So now we have a bunch of teens, children with no authority and nobody to hold them accountable presently because of different restrictions. And then they continue throughout their life without presence, without accountability, without community. And then they raise and have their own children. And because none of that was present during their childhood, they don't know how to do that for the next generation. And then that happened with millennials and the older Gen Zs. And then now we're starting to see like this YN epidemic, quote unquote, because now we're seeing the effects of children who are born to parents who were not raised and who did not have presence in the community. So now this isn't a conversation about people's willingness to parent or their ability to parent. It's about, did they even have a foundation of what good parenting looks like? And I think that is what we're dealing with right now. And a lot of the whole permissive parenting, wanting to be your kids' friends, wanting to level with your kids more, I think is coming more out of the need to not feel how they felt about their parents, right? So they show up for their kids in ways that don't always encourage discipline, accountability, integrity, et cetera, et cetera. And then how that translates to the progression of like this YN culture is that you have an entire generation of people who are not considerate of others because nobody's teaching them to be considerate, because their parents had to fend for themselves, and sometimes their grandparents, their aunts and uncles all had to fend for themselves. We get this mentality of is you versus everybody. And then when you teach that to a child whose brain is not fully developed, then their children are already selfish in general, because that's the natural. So now you have a generation of people who are being taught to be individuals and to only think of self. So it is not necessarily that they have the desire to hurt others. It is the fact that they live in selfishness. That's it. It's because they don't have any reference point or any metric of what real morality, compassion, and empathy looks like, because they're being raised by people who had no empathy themselves as children. So how do you teach it if you don't experience it? And I know what you're saying. Some people learn how to do it, some people don't. But you can't operate as if everybody operates the same. And that's what we're dealing with right now. So that's the parenting aspect. I don't think that people are inherently trying not to be good parents. And I also think they're not making good decisions about whether or not they actually want to be parents. A lot of people have kids who don't actually want to be parents. And that's another thing that we're seeing. So that's the parenting side of it.